Hello, friends. My name is Cindy, and I am one of the children's librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And today we're going to read part 2 of Who Was Frederick Douglass? And it's by April Jones Prince. Are you ready? When Frederick's year with Covey was up, he was sent to work at the nearby farm of William Freeland. Mr. Freeland worked his slaves hard, but not past sundown. He didn't whip them. He provided good tools to work with and enough food to eat. Frederick made some of the best friends of his life at Mr. Freeland's. Before long, he was spending his Sundays and 3 nights a week teaching them to read in secret, though slaves risked 40 lashes on their bare backs for doing this. Frederick's school grew to include more than 40 eager students. By the time he was 18, Frederick decided to make plans to escape. Not wanting to leave his good friends behind, he shared his ideas about running away. 4 friends agreed to come with him. On Easter weekend, they planned to steal a canoe and paddle up Chesapeake Bay, about 70 miles, then follow the North Star on foot until they reached a free state. Frederick wrote out fake passes for himself and his friends, giving them all permission to visit Baltimore. Frederick signed the passes from William Hamilton, who owned one of his friends. Easter Sunday arrived. Early in the morning, the men went to the fields as usual. Frederick had the strange feeling that someone had given them away. Sure enough, 4 white men arrived on horseback. They tied up the 5 suspects and dragged them 15 miles to jail. The only proof of the slaves' plan was the passes Frederick had written. He had quietly thrown his into the fire before he was taken away. He whispered to the others to eat theirs with their morning biscuits. After the Easter holidays, Frederick's friends were released from jail by their owners and taken home. Frederick remained in jail another week, but then he got a lucky break. Master Thomas arrived. He was sending Frederick back to his brother Hugh in Baltimore. Master Thomas said that if Frederick learned a trade and behaved himself, he would free him at age 25. The promise had but one fault, Frederick later wrote. It seemed too good to be true. Chapter 4. Escape. Frederick was now 6 feet tall, strong, and smart. Master Hugh hired him out to one of the many shipyards in Baltimore. Frederick was to do whatever jobs were needed. Fred, bring that roller here. Fred, go get a fresh can of water. Fred, come help saw off the end of this timber. For 8 months, Frederick worked alongside free blacks and whites. At another shipyard, Frederick learned to caulk or fill the cracks in a ship's hull so it wouldn't leak. Within a year, Frederick was earning as much as $9 a week. All this money went to Master Hugh. Frederick felt that he was being robbed of his own wages. Master Hugh hadn't earned this money. Why should he get to keep it? The reason was slavery. And the only answer was once again to plan an escape. Frederick needed to set some money aside for himself. He convinced Master Hugh to let him find his own work. Frederick would buy his own food and tools and pay for a place to live. All these expenses would cost about $6 a week. Master Hugh wouldn't have to pay for any of them. In addition, every Saturday, Frederick would give Master Hugh $3. This was a good deal for Master Hugh, who no longer had to support Frederick. But it was hard for Frederick, who would have to caulk 6 days a week and pick up other jobs too. Still, he was up for the challenge and managed to put away a little of the money every week. During this time, Frederick met a free black woman named Anna Murray. Anna worked as a housekeeper for a rich white family. She and Frederick fell in love and hoped to marry. One weekend in August, Frederick was late bringing Master Hugh his $3. Angry, Master Hugh stopped letting Frederick hire himself out for jobs. Frederick went back to living with his master. This was something he could not endure. With the money he had saved and more from Anna, he would make a run for the north. He set a date he would leave, September 3, 1838. Anna would follow later. As the date approached, Frederick grew uneasy. If he were caught again, he would surely be sold farther south. There, it would be much harder to escape, because the distance to any free state would be so much longer. Anna carefully tailored Fredericks' clothing to look like the uniform of a sailor. On Monday morning, Frederick left the Auld house for work, as usual, but instead of going to the shipyard, Frederick boarded a northbound train from Baltimore. He wore a red shirt, a black tie loosely knotted about his neck, and a broad-brimmed sailor's hat. As proof of his freedom, he carried a friend's seaman papers. These papers described Frederick's friend, who had much darker skin than Frederick. If anyone looked closely and discovered this, Frederick would be arrested. On the train, the conductor asked Frederick for his free papers. My whole future depended upon the decision of this conductor, Frederick knew. Satisfied by the American eagle on top of the seaman's papers, the conductor looked no further. For the time being, Frederick was safe, but he still had 2 boats and 2 more trains to ride to his destination, New York City. And he's going from Baltimore to New York City. That's the map. Finally, Frederick arrived in New York. My chains were broken, he said. I was a free man. Describing his excitement to a friend, he wrote, I felt as one might feel upon escape from a den of hungry lions. The sights of New York dazzled Frederick, but he realized he had to be careful. Slave catchers kept close watch everywhere runaways were likely to go for help or shelter. Anyone might turn him in for a few dollars. If that happened, he would be sent back to Master Hugh. I was afraid to speak to anyone for fear of speaking to the wrong one, Frederick said. He wandered the streets of New York and slept at least one night among barrels on the wharves. I was indeed free from slavery, Frederick later wrote, but free from food and shelter as well. Finally, Frederick shared his story with an honest-looking sailor who took him to the home of David Ruggles. Mr. Ruggles was a black abolitionist who helped runaways. Mr. Ruggles hid Frederick in his home for several days. Frederick sent for Anna, who arrived shortly. The 2 were married on September 15th, 1838. Mr. Ruggles decided the best place for Frederick to go to find work was New Bedford, Massachusetts. Many ships were repaired and outfitted on the wharves there. The growing city had a large community of free blacks who looked out for one another. Slave catchers knew better than to come there, or they would be run out of town. After Frederick and Anna's wedding ceremony, the couple boarded a steamboat and set out on their new life together. No matter what hardships might lie ahead, now the future held hope. Chapter 5, Life in the North. When Frederick and Anna arrived in New Bedford, a free black couple named Mary and Nathan Johnson helped them get started. While in New York, Frederick had given up the last name Bailey in case the Aulds came looking for him. He took the name Johnson instead. But in New Bedford, there were already so many Johnsons, it was difficult to tell them apart. Nathan Johnson suggested the last name Douglass, after a character in a poem he was reading. Frederick agreed, but added an extra S at the end. Eager to find work, Frederick went to the wharves. The scene was quite different from the shipyards in Baltimore. Here, the workers were quiet, focused, and cheerful. There was no whipping, no yelling of mean names, and no loud songs. The white caulkers refused to work with a black man, so Frederick's first job was stocking a ship with oil. It was new, hard, and dirty work, he wrote, but I went at it with a glad heart and a willing hand. I was now my own master. Soon he and Anna had their first daughter, Rosetta. 4 more children would soon follow: Louis, Frederick Jr., Charles, and Annie. In New Bedford, Frederick began reading a newspaper called The Liberator. Published by William Lloyd Garrison, the paper spoke out fiercely against slavery. The paper became my meat and drink, Frederick said. Reading the paper inspired him to go to anti-slavery meetings. He listened, and he spoke about the evils of slavery to his friends and members of the black church he and Anna had joined. In 1841, Frederick attended a meeting of the American Anti-Slavery Society. He was asked if he would say a few words about his experience as a slave. There were hundreds, maybe 1,000 people in the audience. I trembled in every limb, he remembered. And tomorrow we will finish reading Who Was Frederick Douglass? And it's by April Jones Prince, and I hope you enjoyed the second part of Who Was Frederick Douglass. I am Cindy. I am one of the children's librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. Thanks for stopping by, friends. Hope to see you tomorrow.